Do you hear me? Yes. Thanks for coming here. Thanks for making it out and surviving yesterday's heat wave. I got pretty wet today, but at least it wasn't sweat like yesterday. My name is Max. I work at Ren Labs. You might have heard of Ren. I've been working on Ren for 2 years, non-dev, mostly focused on governance stuff. But I'm here to talk about UX in cross-chain and multi-chain space, sort of the UX problems we see and how we want to solve them, how we think the space should solve it in the future. So the current state of the multi-chain world, we see users being overwhelmed by the number of bridges that are out there. Each time I try to make a list of the number of bridges, the list gets like 20 items longer. When I want to use a bridge to move an asset that the REM bridge doesn't support, even I get overwhelmed being in this space, just focusing on cross-chain stuff. Like I'm checking different bridges, seeing which has the best fees, the best slippage, trying to know which one is most safe. Like that's an impossible task for a user. And we see devs struggling with liquidity being scattered across the multi-chain world. Many devs today perhaps want to deploy on a layer 2 to get cheaper and faster transactions. But then your trade-off is that a chain like Optimism or Arbitrum doesn't have as much liquidity as Ethereum. So you get cheaper transactions, so you might be able to get more users that way. But they might get more expensive transactions in terms of slippage, there not being support for a particular asset on that chain. So that's a big problem we see. We see that many bridges are insecure. Last year and this year alone, there's been countless bridges getting hacked. Wormhole, Ronin, there's one Horizon now, and it's pretty scary. And what happens if one of these, a bridge with $1 billion, $2 billion, $5 billion in liquidity in the next couple of years get hacked? Like how would the space get affected by that? It would be catastrophic. We also see just a general lack of interoperability. Some bridges support some assets and some networks, some do others. The users are supposed to navigate this like swamp of different bridges to get across one asset on one network to another asset. It's pretty bad from a user's point of view. And we don't see how the space is sort of ready to interact with sort of a permission TradFi world. It hasn't sort of happened yet, but how will we do it if we want to interoperate with traditional permission ecosystems and perhaps like central bank stable coins? It's unclear how we would handle that. So why do we want to solve sort of these problems? So for devs, as I mentioned, we want to want devs not to have to worry about the trade-off of there being less liquidity on the chain that you want to build on. You should be able to build where you think you will be able to get the most users and have the best user experience. It shouldn't have to come down to liquidity. And for users, we want to get more users, that's one thing. And for that, we need better user experiences, because right now it's terrible. And for the users that we have, we want to make them feel more secure about bridging assets if they want to use some particular application or some chain. These are important things for sort of the crypto ecosystem as a whole to grow. So the current approach, as like we can see, is that one sort of application developers might deploy their application on multiple chains. And this is very hard work, and it's not sustainable. Like SushiSwap is like on 15 chains or something. That just creates so much work for them to manage. It's not sustainable if you get new chains in the future that have different programming frameworks. How would you deploy SushiSwap on like Solana, for instance? It's not sort of within their bandwidth of what they can do when they have to focus on other stuff. And we see things like IBC, interchain communication protocols. They don't work well for like assets like Bitcoin, for instance. It's not a solution that can solve everything. We have bridges that allow you to sort of wrap assets from one network to another. That's sort of what Ren is focused on. what we see limitations to sort of all of these, honestly, is like security is one issue. A lot of bridges getting hacked for different reasons. Costs is another thing. How do we sort of make sure that the costs for users aren't too high while incentivizing the network, the bridges to be secure? Assets aren't supported, not all assets are supported. Liquidity scattered across networks and scattered across bridges. And the UX, which is the focus, that's sort of a real mess right now. So what are the challenges to solve these issues that we have? Well, chains can differ drastically. EVM chains, there's a lot of EVM bridges between EVM chains, and those might work quite well. How do you handle chains that aren't EVM, for instance? Or you have Cosmos ecosystem, you have Polkadot ecosystem, Solana ecosystem, and assets like Bitcoin, Dogecoin, Zcash, whatever, Monero. They are all different, and that makes it very hard for interoperability projects to sort of catch up and make sure that the support for bridging is there. And network security is hard sort of for bridges or interoperability protocols, as hacks have shown. And another challenge is that we cannot compromise on user experience when we try to solve these problems. Because if the user experience isn't there, we won't get the users, the space won't grow as fast as we want. Sort of for the current REN version, it is a bridge that lets you wrap, and it's very flexible. Like you can take assets like Bitcoin that isn't smart, it's a dumb chain, and you can send it to an MPC network that can then let you mint this on some smart contract chain. It's a very flexible approach because the MPC network can simply take care of signing transactions using private keys on sort of any network. So that's good, but you get the issue of liquidity on the other side. If there's not enough liquidity on, say, Optimism, so you mint Bitcoin over to Optimism and you can't swap it, then that's terrible UX. And getting liquidity is expensive. So how can we move forward in this space? So what we at REN are sort of focused on right now is sort of providing tools to developers so that you can build an application where users only need to think about the application. They don't need to think about sort of wallets, networks, gas assets. They only need to think about what the application shows them on the UI. We think this is sort of application-focused development is the future, not having to worry about so users not having to worry about which network they are on, for instance, abstracting away blockchains. So this is sort of the world we think will be very good, effective, where you can sort of deploy an application on something called like the layer 0. So it's simply, so you can deploy it on a sort of layer 1. So we at REN are developing a layer 1, a blockchain where you can deploy applications on, but it supports and interacts with all the networks that REN supports, which is now over like 9 networks and multiple assets. So this is sort of the future we want to get to, where developers only build on the layer 0. As an example, so one thing that REN is building out right now is a project called Catalog, which is a cross-chain AMM DEX. And the sort of power with having REN as the sort of thing that connects all the chains is that we can both use liquidity and aggregate liquidity that is on other chains. So say a user wants to move Bitcoin to DAI. There is already plenty of DAI to Ethereum liquidity on Ethereum, say. So what we can do is that we can we can let users sort of access this trading route by also deploying like a native pool on REN, so say like a Bitcoin to Ethereum pool, so native Bitcoin to native Ethereum. We can let users do that swap and do the Ethereum to DAI swap sort of in one go, and then the user gets DAI in the end. And with this model, you don't have to worry about, as a user, doesn't have to worry about gas, because any transactions on REN would be sort of gasless because you're interacting with native assets. The gas is already sort of baked in a transaction when you send it. And we also, for this to sort of work really well, we have to let users not have to worry about gas at all, because the more chains and networks you interact with, the more sort of gas assets you need. So we would provide tools that let you sort of bake in the gas in any network interaction that needs gas. But you can imagine this being applicable to any sort of DeFi Lego and potentially new DeFi Legos out there, where you can aggregate liquidity across chains. It could be lending, leverage trading, whatever you can think of. It doesn't have to just be trading. So REN could be a layer where you can aggregate, essentially, all the liquidity that is out there that's supported by REN to have the best user experience for the users. So we see this as you can imagine that you can get sort of cross-chain accounts that are powered by REN, but it's using any wallet that you already have, because when you sign, you can use Metamask to sort of sign a message that gets sent to REN, and that then executes a transaction. So you can use any wallet, Metamask, Trust Wallet, you name it. Any asset that sort of REN support would be supported by your application if you built on this. And any trades executed on layer 1 would be gasless, and we would provide tools to sort of make the other ends where there is gas necessary to be zero gas for the user. To summarize, we think sort of the future is that developers need to focus on the applications themselves and providing the best user experience, and not having to worry about which chain they're deployed on and how much liquidity there is. We want to have a sort of a state of the world where liquidity is boundless. There's no boundaries between networks. So you can aggregate liquidity that's already out there. We don't need to build new liquidity pools to handle this. Most of it is already out there. We just need to connect them. And have a state where you have you can have one wallet to manage all of your assets in a way. And it can be MetaMask. You can use MetaMask to manage your Bitcoin, for instance. This simplifies things immensely for the users and for developers to sort of market how you market your application to users. It becomes much easier now when this number of steps they need to do to interact with your application becomes much less. So yeah, thank you very much. That's all. Any questions? I'm not a technical developer, but I can try to answer. Are we good? Okay, thank you guys.